want to start with the acknowledgments. These are the most important things. First of all, my co-authors on the work that I'm going to present today, Tim, Carol, you'll see, Caitlin St. Charles, our workhorse back at the university. This work I'm presenting today is a collaboration with Greg Suskovich and Beth Thompson at the Minnesota Board of Animal Health. And Mike Starkey, this is kind of his idea and his thing that he likes to champion over at the Department of Agriculture, and you'll see why in a minute. We're currently funded by the State of Minnesota Board of Animal Health and the Minnesota Pork Board, and we do a lot of cooperative agreements with USDA, APHIS folks like Lori Miller and her folks, and the SIA group on risk assessments. And what I'm going to present to you today is a perspectives article that was already published. So I'm doing something that they do at flu meetings all the time. They present work they've already published. But this is such an obscure little journal that I wanted to bring it to your attention. So you can search on it. I don't publish a lot, so if you search on my name and Culhane and emergency, you'll find it. But I just want to say that what I'm presenting here is my own opinion, and it's the opinions of these authors, not of our funders, not of our employers, and so nobody gets in trouble. But what I wanted to talk about today was this emergency response. And so when you think about an emergency response, it's really this response to a fire, flood, tornado, hurricane, and that's going to be this afternoon sessions is a lot about those things on agriculture. But when we think about those, there's this local responder network, right? You call 911 and you get them all, right, like that. But if the emergency is beyond that local 911 call, you know, then the state troopers come in or the National Guard comes in or whatever, and there's a coordinated emergency response to something that involves the public health or the community, to something like a tornado or something like that. But for agricultural emergency response, the local authority isn't really well established everywhere and uniformly. And who has that authority to command that response varies kind of state to state. So it's not carried out all the time at the same level of efficiency and emergency. And unfortunately, this afternoon and a little bit later, you'll hear about the different ways those things are handled. But you need that coordination to have a nice rapid response. And so you always want to handle response economically, like we saw in the previous talk. We talk about economics and environment all the time. And your overall goal is to sustain our food system so that they remain intact after the emergency is resolved. When the emergency happens, a lot of stuff's going to happen, and we'll hear that in a little bit. But once that emergency is resolved, we want to get right back into business before. And so for agricultural emergencies, the authority to respond really depends on the scale of the outbreak, the state's resources and readiness, the state agriculture agency's ability, and the state agriculture producer's ability, right? So if we can't bury, that's not the problem of the producer, that he's on a ground with a high watershed, right? So that just means he doesn't have that ability to bury. And so you'll have to bring in different resources there. So Mike Starkey's been on this bandwagon and pounding this drum for a while, is he wants an all-hazards approach. So no matter what the hazard is to our agriculture, whether it be food agriculture or crop agriculture, we can have an effectively managed emergency situation with a multi-level, multi-agency response, and something that maintains continuity of business, right? So those farmers don't go out of work, so those food producers don't go out of work. And so what we did in this paper is we looked at past outbreaks and the impacts and challenges of those outbreaks, and we looked at hypothetical outbreaks. What if foot and mouth disease came to the United States? And then we looked at other food and agriculture-related outbreaks, things we don't think about happening to milk or to land or things like that. And so here's some facts about the past outbreak. In 2015 in Minnesota, high path H5 came in, and there were 108 infected premises. That's over 9 million birds, and the majority of those were turkeys. But there were also 156 affected but not infected premises, so premises that were trapped in the control area around those infected premises. That's 21 million birds that were affected. And so 260 commercial poultry operations were managed during that outbreak. And that took a lot of resources. And what did we learn there? Well, to take care of that on the U.S. side, over $1 billion was spent in indemnity and disease control during that outbreak. And those funds were spent to protect the $1 million collective poultry industry, which is still alive and thriving today. I had eggs for breakfast this morning, and I had bacon too, so thank you. And I had fruit, and I had coffee. All right, so anyway, keep going. So the losses to the industry would have been even greater, though, if we wouldn't have been able to have some continuity of business planning. If we had to go back here, what if it wasn't just these 108 premises that were infected? What if it was the other 156 as well? And so all 264 going down the tubes, right? The cost would have been a little bit higher than that. Never do math in public, Bob said, so I'm not even going to do that math for you. So we've looked at hypothetical outbreaks, FMD predictions. There's been some papers out there that say if an FMD outbreak hit in the center of Iowa, there'd be about 1,700 livestock operations in there. Remember, FMD is a multi-species disease, so we're talking cattle, and we're talking swine, and we're talking other creatures as well. And the amount of operations would be over 2.5 million livestock from those 1,700 operations. And we already saw these funeral pyre pictures. When we look at the UK, what did they do in 2001? They depopulated all these animals, but then they had a lot of negative unintended consequences that were far greater than the cost of the disease itself. In the paper, you can go into detail on the costs of previous outbreaks way back to 1924, and then adjusting those dollars for inflation when we could from different outbreaks such as high path AI in 24 and 83 in 2014, foot and mouth disease in the UK in the 67, 68 and 2001, and exotic Newcastle disease in 1971 in California, and then 2002, 2003 in the southwestern United States, and the cash register is still ringing on veteran Newcastle disease right now in California. Over a year and a half, we're in that outbreak. It's still going on. Something you probably don't think about as being veterinarians, but maybe you do because you're closely involved in agriculture, is some other food ag emergencies that have occurred in the world. 1979, 3 Mile Island. There was a great cost to the dairy producers in Pennsylvania that people didn't want to take Pennsylvania milk. And so in all the markets around Pennsylvania for over hundreds of miles, they would say, we don't sell Pennsylvania milk, because people thought that the cows that were getting that milk from 3 Mile Island were affected. Chernobyl, 52 kilometers squared of land affected after Chernobyl. And then there was an earthquake in Japan in 2011, and a nuclear reactor there was affected, and 80,000 farms were affected by that. So these outbreaks happen to agriculture as well. So how do you deal with these outbreaks? You want to have good collaborations. And this is the typical NASCAR photo, which I really like putting these together because I love looking at people's logos and I love getting ideas. So I love making NASCAR photos or quilts or something like that. So this is all the people that collaborated in Minnesota during high path AI. And so if you extend that out to Iowa, Nebraska, Missouri, Wisconsin, it would be even bigger. We'd have to put a whole mural, a whole side of a wall here. So when we look at that, well, what would that look like for Minnesota for our swine producers during African swine fever? And we started to get together our independent producers and our semi-integrated producers and our big vet clinics and our independent vet clinics, our mixed vet clinics and our different agencies all around. And we kind of have the same type of collaboration, and how do we get that going? And why do we need to get these collaborations going? And we're going to learn about that is because we want to be able to address these key elements of these all-hazard response plans. And the first element is preparedness. You need to have that incident command structure, that ICS, in place. And we're very strong advocates of the University of Minnesota and here in Minnesota in general that needs to include industry. You cannot do that and just say, oh, by the way, producer, you're going to do this. Oh, you can't do that? Oh, well, we never thought of that. So you need to bring the producers in all the time at the beginning. You have to have a place for that incident command to be. You have to have the supplies on hand and the trained personnel. And that's why there's all this training going on all the time now, because this is the first part of our response, is to be prepared. And then you need to line up good depopulation contractors that have the equipment. These are some of the things we have in place in Minnesota, so we shouldn't panic. The other thing that's part of the all-hazard response is then the response itself. And that's going to have some quarantine and movement controls, and there's a lot of talk of movement standstills and how to do those. You're going to do these disease investigations, you're going to get those diagnostics done and the results delivered to the right people at the right time, and then you're going to get rid of that infected premise by depopulating those animals and disposing them appropriately. There's different levels to do that in the national and the state plans. And then finally, the last level of response is continuity of business, where you want to allow those producers that are not infected, but they're trapped in that control area with that infected premise, so they're affected. We want to be able to have them to be some type of continuity of business based on the best science available for the risks involved in their different movements and their different functions every day. Because what we want to do is provide a safe and wholesome food to our consumers. And so what we think is that the response structure would be like this, and that big red box would include industry. We're going to talk more about all those people that you're going to get involved in this in Abby Noy's talk. But I'll just end up here is that this is an ongoing process. We have to have the science and education and outreach and ongoing support from everybody in this room to get these things going, to get these collaborations going, to get these all hazards response things going. For more information, you can find that paper and all of our stuff in our proactive risk assessments at this website here. Like I said, Google my name. I don't publish very much, so Culhane, you'll be able to find something written by me. So with that, I thank you for your time, and hopefully we got us back on time.